Brothers and sisters, today we will continue Genesis 46 to 48. Genesis 46 tells the story of Jacob and his family's journey to Egypt. Jacob, also known as Israel, received a message from God, assuring him that it was safe to go to Egypt. He gathered his sons and their families, along with all their possessions, and set out on the journey. In total, 70 people from Jacob's household traveled to Egypt. When they arrived, Joseph, who was already in Egypt and held a high position, came to meet his father Jacob. They embraced and wept together, overwhelmed with joy at their reunion. Joseph presented his brothers and his father to Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt. Pharaoh welcomed them and granted them the land of Goshen, where they could settle and flourish. Genesis 46 emphasizes the fulfillment of God's promises to Jacob and his descendants. It highlights the significance of family, unity, and the providential guidance of God. The chapter marks a pivotal moment in the history of the Israelites as they begin their sojourn in Egypt. Genesis 47 continues the story of Joseph and his family's time in Egypt. Due to the ongoing famine, Joseph managed the distribution of grain and provided for the people. When Jacob and his family arrived in Egypt, Joseph introduced 5 of his brothers to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked about their occupation, and they explained that they were shepherds. Pharaoh allowed them to settle in the land of Goshen, where they could tend to their flocks. As the famine persisted, the people ran out of money to buy grain from Joseph. They approached him, expressing their need for food. Joseph proposed a solution. They could exchange their livestock and land for grain. The people willingly agreed, grateful for Joseph's provision. Only the priests were exempted from this arrangement, as they received an allotment from Pharaoh. The people of Egypt praised Joseph for saving their lives through his wise management. The years of famine continued, and Joseph continued to collect the people's possessions and livestock in exchange for grain. By the end of the famine, the people were grateful to Joseph, and Pharaoh granted them land in Egypt. Genesis 47 highlights Joseph's leadership and wisdom during a time of crisis. It reveals the impact of the famine on the people and showcases Joseph's ability to navigate through challenging circumstances. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of Joseph's family in the overall plan of God's redemption. Genesis 48 recounts the story of Jacob's blessing upon Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob was now old and nearing the end of his life. Joseph visited his father with his 2 sons, and Jacob expressed his desire to bless them. As Jacob saw Joseph's sons, he asked who they were. Joseph introduced them as his own sons, and Jacob was overjoyed to see them. Jacob told Joseph that his sons would be considered his own, just like Reuben and Simeon. Jacob then asked to bless the boys. However, his eyes were weak with age, so he could not see them clearly. Joseph positioned his sons in front of Jacob, with Manasseh, the firstborn, on Jacob's right, and Ephraim, the younger, on his left. But Jacob crossed his arms, placing his right hand on Ephraim's head and his left hand on Manasseh's head. Joseph tried to correct his father, but Jacob insisted that he knew what he was doing. He declared that Ephraim would become greater than Manasseh and that his descendants would become a multitude of nations. Jacob blessed both boys, praying for God's blessings and protection upon them. He also promised that they would inherit the land that God had given to Abraham and Isaac. Genesis 48 demonstrates Jacob's recognition of Joseph's sons as his own and his divine insight into their future. It reveals the significance of the birthright, and how God's blessings are not always bestowed in accordance with birth order. The chapter highlights the faithfulness of God's promises and the passing on of blessings from one generation to the next. Dear brothers and sisters, we will continue the next chapters in the next video.